What are you going to be watching for when the Chancellor speaks?
Well, I mean, I don't envy the Chancellor the difficult choices that she's had to take to get to the spending review. At the budget earlier in the year, she had to raise a huge amount of tax and change the fiscal rules. And yet, this is still an incredibly tight spending review. And that is because the spending plans of the previous government were implied such big cuts that she's having to do a lot of work just to prevent cuts from happening to get back to zero before you can even get to investing additional money to drive growth or better public services. So I think it's going to be a tough one. I think the things that I'm looking out for. Firstly, the capital spend I think is as interesting as the kind of day-to-day public spending, and that's because we have the lowest investment in the G7 in the UK, and that's holding back growth. And so she's announced a big increase, a total increase. The question is, what things is she going to prioritise to really get that growth? And in particular, is that investment going to be going across the country? Is it going to be geographically dispersed? Are we going to address some of the inequalities in the north, for example, and try and shift our growth model, which is very anchored in London? Or is it going to be more investment into the south and the southeast, which has been the kind of trend over recent decades? And then the second thing I would really point to is that this spending review, although it's really about allocation of money across departments, it's also the moment when the government is going to announce a bunch of its reform plans. So it's as important as a kind of definitional moment for what does this government stand for, what's its priorities, how is it going to reform the way we do politics and policy in this country. So the NHS long-term plan is coming up. How are they going to spend that money to increase productivity to get better outcomes for patients? We're also expecting the industrial strategy in the coming days. That will really shape the kind of industries of the future and the growth model of the UK. So I think the reform agendas that she talks about in her speech, the way this money is allocated within departments is going to be as interesting as the overall numbers.
Indeed, that's an interesting point to make, actually, because it's not just about a lump sum of money that a department gets, but it's how it's divided and where the focus is going to be. Will we get a sense of that from her speech, or is that something we have to wait days on?
I think what we'll get is some top level, kind of top line announcements. I think she will make a bunch of specific announcements of things they are going to invest in, rail lines in the north. We heard about a nuclear power plant investment yesterday. So I think we will get some specifics, but I think for the full detail, we're going to have to wait for some of those big set piece reform announcements, the NHS long-term plan, the child poverty strategy, of course, coming up. It will be these kind of reform plans that I think will come out in the weeks that follow that really tell us, is this money going to make a real difference? Are they going to fundamentally change the structures of our economy or the way we do public services in this country? And we're going to have to wait a bit for the detail.
And of course, it's been a few days now since we learnt of that U-turn on the winter fuel payments. Are any of these announcements likely to perhaps get U-turned further down the line? Is there wriggle room for that?
I mean, things can always change, as we know. Anyone who predicts that politics will be stable is in for a shock, I think, at the moment. But I think this will lock down a lot more of the government's plans. We'll have a much clearer sense of the direction of travel here, of what their priorities are, and areas that are more challenging. And I would say that the big area that I think there's a question mark over is at the budget in the autumn, do they feel the need to raise more tax revenue to top up those departments that have had a harder time at the spending review or to compensate for lower growth? I think that's a really distinct possibility. And that would be the biggest change, would be to say, actually, the spending envelope that we've set at this spending review was too tight and we're going to have to come back and raise more revenue and put more money into public services than we thought. That's the thing I think we need to look out for.
Okay. Harry Quilter-Pinner from the IPPR, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts ahead of the spending review.